In a world where royal protocols dictate every movement and security teams plan every second of public appearances, what happens when a future queen breaks all the rules for a single moment? What compels someone born into privilege to stop everything? The convoy, the schedule, the carefully orchestrated plans, just to acknowledge a child's innocent greeting. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a scripted moment for cameras. This is the true story of how one spontaneous act of kindness on an ordinary British street became an extraordinary reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply see another human being and respond with genuine warmth. In an age of increasing distance between public figures and ordinary people, where social media creates connections but also barriers, this moment stands as proof that authentic human connection still exists. It reminds us that titles and crowns don't have to create walls, and that the simplest gestures often carry the greatest meaning. This is the story of a day that started like any other, a little girl with big dreams, and a princess who remembered what it felt like to be seen and heard. It's about the ripple effects that occur when someone in a position of power chooses compassion over convenience, and how a 2-minute conversation can change lives in ways no one could predict. Sometimes the most important moments in history aren't the grand ceremonies or official announcements. Sometimes they happen on quiet residential streets, when someone decides that a child's smile is worth more than any schedule. 8-year-old Emma Richardson pressed her face against the cool glass of her bedroom window, watching the raindrops race each other down the pane. The October morning in Windsor was typical for the season, gray clouds hanging low over the quiet residential street, puddles reflecting the muted light, and the kind of dampness that made her mother insist on wearing a proper coat. Emma's breath fogged the window as she waited, something she had been doing every Tuesday morning for the past 3 weeks. Her grandmother had mentioned, almost casually over tea and biscuits, that sometimes the royal family's cars traveled down their street when heading to certain engagements. Not often, mind you, Nan had said with a knowing smile, but enough that you might catch a glimpse if you're paying attention. Emma had taken this information very seriously, the way only an 8-year-old could, and had appointed herself the official royal watcher of Clarence Road. From her second-floor perch, Emma could see the entire street. Mrs. Patterson was walking her ancient corgi, Mr. Biscuit, who moved so slowly that their morning walk had become a neighborhood landmark. The postal worker, Dave, was making his rounds, whistling the same tune he always did, something her father claimed was from an old Beatles song. Everything was wonderfully, predictably ordinary. Emma's mother, Sarah Richardson, called from downstairs. "Emma, breakfast is ready, and you need to get dressed for school." But Emma couldn't move from her post. She had a feeling about today, the kind of inexplicable certainty that children possess but adults have learned to dismiss. Today felt different, charged with possibility in a way she couldn't explain. The Richardson family lived in one of those comfortable middle-class homes that line the streets around Windsor. Not grand enough to be remarkable, but solid and welcoming, with its red brick facade and small front garden that Sarah tended with weekend devotion. Tom Richardson worked as an accountant for a local firm, and Sarah taught primary school children not much older than Emma herself. They were, by any measure, an ordinary British family living an ordinary British life. But Emma had never been particularly interested in ordinary. From the time she could walk, she had been drawn to stories of princesses and castles, not because she wanted to live in a fairy tale, but because she was fascinated by the idea of people who dedicated their lives to helping others. When other children played house, Emma played royal duties, organizing charity drives for her stuffed animals, and hosting elaborate tea parties where she practiced what she imagined royal conversations might sound like. Her fascination wasn't born from tabloid culture or celebrity obsession. Emma's interest in the royal family came from something deeper. A child's intuitive understanding that these were people who had chosen service over self-interest, who had committed their lives to something bigger than themselves. In her young mind, being royal wasn't about privilege or wealth. It was about responsibility and kindness. 3 weeks earlier, Emma had been walking home from school with her friend Lucy when they saw a small convoy of dark cars moving slowly down their street. Lucy had shrugged and continued talking about their upcoming math test, but Emma had been transfixed. She couldn't see through the tinted windows, couldn't know who might be inside, but the possibility had ignited something in her imagination. That evening, she had peppered her parents with questions. Do you think it was really them? Do they come down our street often? What do you think they were doing? Do you think they noticed our house? Tom and Sarah had exchanged the kind of amused glances parents share when their child latches on to something with particular intensity. It's possible, sweetheart, Sarah had said gently. The royal family does have various commitments around Windsor. But remember, they're just people doing their job, like Daddy and I do our jobs. But to Emma, they weren't just people. They were symbols of something she couldn't quite articulate. The idea that you could dedicate your life to making other people feel important and cared for. She had seen the Princess of Wales on television during various charitable events, had watched her kneel down to speak to children at eye level, had observed the way she listened intently when people spoke to her. These weren't the actions of someone going through the motions. They were the behaviors of someone who genuinely cared. Now, 3 weeks later, Emma maintained her vigilant watch. She had developed an elaborate system for her royal spotting mission. She had positioned a small chair by her bedroom window, kept a notebook to record any suspicious vehicle activity, and had even convinced her mother to let her keep a small pair of binoculars on her windowsill. Originally purchased for a school project about birds, but quickly repurposed for more important surveillance work. Her dedication had become something of a family joke. Tom would ruffle her hair each morning and ask, "Any royal sightings today, Princess Emma?" Sarah would smile and remind her not to be late for school because she was too busy monitoring the royal highways. But neither parent discouraged her interest. There was something lovely about their daughter's enthusiasm, something innocent and hopeful that they were reluctant to dampen. The truth was, Emma's vigil had become more than just royal watching. It had become a daily meditation on possibility, a few minutes each morning when the world felt full of potential. As she watched the familiar rhythms of her neighborhood, the same people walking the same routes, the same cars making the same journeys, she was really watching for magic to interrupt the ordinary. This particular Tuesday morning, Emma noticed several things that seemed different. There was more activity than usual on the street. A police car had driven past twice, which never happened. Mrs. Patterson's dog walk had been cut short, and she had hurried back inside with an urgency that seemed out of character. Even Dave the postman seemed to be moving with more purpose than his usual leisurely pace. Emma's pulse quickened. She grabbed her binoculars and focused on the end of the street where it connected to the main road. Nothing yet, but the feeling in her chest, that flutter of anticipation, was growing stronger. She had learned to trust this feeling over the past few weeks. It had been wrong more often than right, but when it was right, it was spectacularly right. Her mother's voice came again from downstairs, more insistent this time. "Emma Richardson, you come down here this instant. You'll be late for school." But Emma couldn't leave her post. Not now. Not when every instinct she possessed was telling her that today was the day. She called back, "Just 5 more minutes, Mom. Please. I think something's happening." Sarah Richardson sighed from the kitchen, recognizing the particular tone in her daughter's voice that meant negotiation would be futile. Emma had inherited her father's stubborn streak and her mother's intuition, a combination that made her remarkably persistent when she set her mind to something. Sarah looked at the clock and calculated whether they could afford 5 more minutes before the morning routine would become a frantic rush. Meanwhile, 8 miles away, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reviewing her schedule for the day with her private secretary. The morning's engagement had been moved up slightly due to traffic considerations, which meant they would be taking a different route than originally planned. It was a minor adjustment, the kind that happened regularly due to the complex logistics of royal life. She had no way of knowing that this small change would intersect with the hopeful vigilance of a little girl she had never met. The princess was particularly looking forward to today's visit to a local primary school, where she would be launching a new literacy initiative. Education had always been close to her heart, and the opportunity to spend time with young students energized her in a way that more formal ceremonial duties sometimes didn't. She had spent the previous evening reviewing the materials they would be presenting and thinking about how to make the experience meaningful for the children. As her car prepared to leave Kensington Palace, Catherine thought about the importance of these school visits. They weren't just photo opportunities or ceremonial obligations. They were chances to connect with young people, to listen to their ideas and dreams, to remind them that their voices mattered. She had learned, over her years in royal life, that these moments of genuine connection were often the most valuable parts of her role. Back on Clarence Road, Emma's 5 minutes had stretched to 10, but her mother's protests had grown quieter. Something about her daughter's certainty had begun to affect Sarah as well. She found herself glancing out the kitchen window, wondering if perhaps Emma's instincts were more reliable than adult skepticism would suggest. The neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. Even Mr. Biscuit the Corgi had stopped his usual sniffing routine and was sitting alertly on the sidewalk, his head cocked, as if listening for something only dogs could hear. The morning light, filtering through the gray clouds, seemed to have a quality of expectation about it. Emma adjusted her binoculars and swept them slowly across the street one more time. Nothing, but the feeling in her chest hadn't subsided. If anything, it was growing stronger, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to vibrate with energy. She took a deep breath and settled in for what she somehow knew would be the most important wait of her young life. At exactly 9:23 a.m., Emma spotted the first sign that her instincts had been correct. A sleek black motorcycle appeared at the end of Clarence Road, moving slowly and deliberately. The rider wore a high-visibility jacket and seemed to be scanning the area with the professional alertness she had seen in action movies. Her heart began to race as she realized this was a police outrider, the kind that accompanied important people. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her binoculars tighter. She had studied videos of royal motorcades online with the dedication of a military strategist, and she knew the sequence by heart. First came the lead motorcycle, then there would be a pause, followed by the main convoy of vehicles. The timing was crucial, and everything she was seeing matched her careful research. "Mum," she called downstairs, her voice cracking with excitement. "It's happening. They're coming." Sarah Richardson's footsteps could be heard hurrying up the stairs. Despite her practical nature, she had been infected by her daughter's enthusiasm over the past weeks. When Sarah reached Emma's room and saw her daughter's face pressed against the window, binoculars in hand, she couldn't help but smile. The intensity of Emma's focus was remarkable for a child her age. "Are you sure, love?" Sarah asked, moving to stand beside her daughter at the window. "Remember last week when you thought the minister's car was a royal vehicle?" But Emma was already vindicated. A second motorcycle appeared, followed by a brief pause that seemed to stretch forever. Then, moving with stately precision, came 3 dark cars. They weren't traveling at normal traffic speed, but moved with the measured pace of a formal procession. The lead car was clearly a security vehicle, followed by what Emma immediately recognized as the main car, slightly larger, with a distinctive silhouette she had memorized from countless photographs. Sarah felt her own pulse quicken as she watched the small motorcade approach their house. Whether or not this was actually the Princess of Wales, the formal nature of the convoy made it clear that someone important was inside those vehicles. She found herself holding her breath, caught up in her daughter's anticipation. The cars moved past their house at a steady pace, and, for a moment, Emma felt the familiar pang of disappointment she had experienced during previous false alarms. But then, something extraordinary happened. The middle car, the one she was certain was the main vehicle, began to slow down. Not the gradual deceleration of someone looking for an address, but the deliberate slowing of someone who had made a decision. Emma's eyes widened as the car came to a complete stop directly in front of their house. Through her binoculars, she could see the driver speaking into a radio device. The security motorcycles had stopped as well, their riders positioning themselves with practiced efficiency. Whatever was happening, it was happening right outside her window. "Mum, they've stopped," Emma whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "They've actually stopped in front of our house." Sarah moved closer to the window, her teacher's instincts kicking in. She could see that a small crowd was beginning to gather on the street. Mrs. Patterson had emerged from her house with Mr. Biscuit, and several other neighbors were peering curiously from their doorways. The attention seemed to be focused on their side of the street, though Sarah couldn't understand why. Inside the royal car, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had noticed something that made her heart skip. As they had driven down the residential street, she had glimpsed a small figure in an upstairs window, holding what appeared to be binoculars and clearly watching their passage with intense interest. But what had truly caught her attention was the handmade sign pressed against the glass beside the child. Emma had forgotten completely about the sign she had made 3 weeks earlier. In her excitement about finally seeing a royal motorcade, she hadn't noticed that her carefully crafted poster had fallen from its hiding place and was now clearly visible in the window. Written in her best handwriting, decorated with colorful markers and glitter, the sign read, "Hello, Princess Catherine. Welcome to Clarence Road. Love from Emma." The princess had spotted the sign immediately, and something about the innocent enthusiasm it represented had touched her deeply. In a world of formal protocols and carefully planned interactions, here was a child who had taken the time to create a personal welcome, who had been watching and waiting with pure, uncomplicated hope. The spontaneous warmth of the gesture cut through all the layers of royal formality like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Could we stop for a moment?" Catherine asked her protection officer. "There's a little girl in that window who seems to have made a sign for us." The security team's response was immediate and professional. Within seconds, they had assessed the situation, confirmed that the street was secure, and determined that a brief stop could be safely accommodated. This kind of spontaneous interaction was unusual, but not unprecedented. The princess was known for her genuine interest in connecting with people, especially children, and her security team had learned to facilitate these moments when circumstances allowed. Emma watched in disbelief as the car door opened and a familiar figure emerged. Even from her second-floor vantage point, there was no mistaking Catherine, Princess of Wales. She was smaller than Emma had expected from seeing her on television, more graceful in person, and she moved with the kind of natural elegance that didn't seem studied or artificial. She was wearing a navy blue coat that Emma would later describe to her friends in precise detail, and her hair caught the morning light as she looked up toward Emma's window. Sarah gasped audibly as she realized what was happening. "Oh my goodness, Emma. I think she saw your sign." The princess raised her hand in a gentle wave toward the window, and Emma's response was immediate and unguarded. She pressed herself against the glass and waved back with both hands, her binoculars forgotten on the windowsill. The pure joy on her face would have melted the hardest heart, and Catherine found herself smiling genuinely for the first time that morning. But the princess didn't stop at a simple wave. Instead, she began walking toward the Richardson house, her security team adjusting their positions to accommodate this unplanned interaction. Emma's mother quickly understood what was happening and felt a moment of panic about their appearance, the state of the house, and whether she should have prepared for such an incredible possibility. "Emma, she's coming to the door," Sarah said, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "We need to go downstairs right now." But Emma was transfixed. She could see the princess walking up their small front path, past her mother's carefully tended flower beds, past the garden gnome that her father insisted was charmingly British, straight toward their front door. It was surreal, like watching a dream sequence in a movie, except she was wide awake, and this was really happening. The doorbell rang. Emma and Sarah looked at each other for a frozen moment, both trying to process the fact that the future Queen of England was standing on their doorstep. Sarah's teacher training kicked in, reminding her to stay calm and model appropriate behavior, while Emma's 8-year-old mind was simply trying to accept that her weeks of watching and waiting had culminated in this impossible moment. Should we answer it? Emma whispered, as if the princess might not realize they were home. Sarah smoothed her hair quickly and checked her appearance in the hallway mirror. She was wearing jeans and a comfortable sweater, nothing special, but she looked like what she was, a busy mother getting her family ready for a normal day. Somehow, that felt appropriate for this most extraordinary of circumstances. Yes, love, we should definitely answer it, Sarah said, taking Emma's hand. But remember, she's a very important person, and we should be respectful. As they walked down the stairs together, Emma felt as though she was floating. Every fairy tale she had ever read, every story about princesses and kindness and magic seemed to be condensing into this single moment. But this wasn't a story. This was real life, and a real princess was about to walk into her real world. The security team had positioned themselves discreetly, but visibly around the property, and several neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk to watch the unprecedented scene unfolding on their quiet street. Mrs. Patterson was holding Mr. Biscuit, who seemed unusually alert and well-behaved for the occasion. Dave the postman had stopped his route entirely and was standing at a respectful distance, clearly understanding that he was witnessing something special. Sarah reached for the door handle and paused for just a moment, looking down at her daughter. Emma's face was radiant with anticipation, her eyes bright with the kind of pure happiness that adults spend their lives trying to recapture. Whatever happened next, Sarah realized this moment had already given Emma something precious, the knowledge that dreams sometimes come true in the most unexpected ways. She opened the door, and there stood Catherine, Princess of Wales, smiling warmly and looking remarkably normal for someone who had just stepped out of a royal motorcade. Her presence was both regal and approachable, formal yet friendly, and Emma felt immediately that this was exactly how a real princess should be. "Hello," said the future Queen of England. "I believe someone in this house said hello to me first, and I thought it would be terribly rude not to say hello back." Emma stood in her doorway, suddenly tongue-tied despite having imagined this moment countless times. All her carefully rehearsed royal greetings evaporated as she found herself face-to-face with someone who had existed only in her imagination and on television screens. The princess seemed to understand this perfectly and waited patiently, her smile encouraging and free of any expectation. "You must be Emma," Catherine said, her voice warm and genuinely interested. "I saw your beautiful sign in the window. Did you make that yourself?" Emma nodded, still unable to find her voice, but her mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder, providing the comfort she needed to speak. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," Emma managed, the formal address coming naturally despite her nervousness. "I made it 3 weeks ago. I've been watching for you every Tuesday." The princess's expression showed genuine surprise and delight. "Every Tuesday? That's quite dedicated of you. And please, you can call me Catherine." She glanced at Sarah with a smile that immediately put the nervous mother at ease. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced. When I saw Emma's sign, I simply couldn't drive past without saying hello." Sarah found her voice, though she still felt as though she was living in someone else's life. "Of course not, Your Royal Highness. We're absolutely honored. I'm Sarah Richardson, Emma's mother. Would you like to come in for a moment? I could put the kettle on." It was such a fundamentally British response to an unprecedented situation that Catherine laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that immediately transformed the formal interaction into something more personal. "That's very kind of you, but I don't want to impose on your morning routine. I can see Emma needs to get ready for school." Emma's eyes widened in horror at the mention of school. The idea of leaving for her ordinary Tuesday classes when a most extraordinary thing that had ever happened was occurring in her front garden seemed impossible to contemplate. She looked desperately at her mother, silently pleading for some intervention in the cosmic injustice of timing. Catherine, who had spent years learning to read children's expressions, immediately understood Emma's dilemma. She had 3 children of her own and recognized the look of a child caught between excitement and obligation. More importantly, She remembered being 8 years old herself, when the adult world schedules and priorities seemed completely divorced for what actually mattered. Although, the princess continued thoughtfully, I suppose being late for school might be acceptable under these particular circumstances. What do you think, Mrs. Richardson? Could Emma spare a few minutes to show me around your lovely garden? I noticed some beautiful flowers by your front path. The request was gracious and perfectly calculated to include Sarah in the decision while giving Emma exactly what she most wanted, more time with her unexpected royal visitor. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude toward this woman who understood not just children, but parents navigating impossible situations. I think that would be wonderful, Sarah agreed. Emma's teacher is very understanding, and I suspect this might qualify as an educational experience. Emma's face lit up as though someone had plugged her into an electrical socket. Educational experience seemed like a dramatic understatement for what was happening, but she wasn't about to question the adult logic that was allowing her to extend this magical interlude. As they stepped outside into the garden, Emma's nervousness began to fade, replaced by the natural enthusiasm that had driven her royal watching project. She began pointing out various features of their small front garden with the pride of a homeowner showing off a grand estate. "Those are Mum's roses," Emma explained, indicating Sarah's carefully tended flower bed. She says they're called David Austin roses, and they smell absolutely lovely in the summer. And that's Dad's vegetable patch where he grows tomatoes that never quite work out properly, but he keeps trying anyway. Catherine listened with the same attention she gave to briefings about state affairs, asking genuine questions about the garden and clearly enjoying Emma's commentary. She knelt down to smell the late-blooming roses, remarking on their beautiful color, and examined Tom's optimistic vegetable patch with serious consideration. "Tomatoes can be quite tricky," the princess agreed solemnly. "My husband struggles with them as well. He's much better with herbs. Does your father have any luck with those?" The conversation was so natural that Emma temporarily forgot she was talking to royalty. This was just a nice woman who was interested in gardens and seemed to understand the challenges of growing vegetables in British weather. When Catherine asked about the small greenhouse tucked against the side of their house, Emma launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her own gardening project. "That's where I'm growing my sunflowers," Emma said proudly. "They're not very big yet because I only started them in September, which Dad says is completely the wrong time, but I wanted to see if they would grow anyway. I read that sunflowers always turn to face the sun, and I thought that was lovely, like they're always trying to be positive." Catherine paused in her examination of the greenhouse, struck by Emma's observation. There was something profound in the child's simple interpretation of sunflowers always turning toward the light, always seeking the positive. It was a philosophy that applied to much more than gardening, and the princess found herself genuinely moved by this 8-year-old's wisdom. "That's a beautiful way to think about it, Emma," Catherine said quietly. "I think you might be onto something important there. Even when things are difficult, we can choose to turn toward the light." Emma beamed at having her idea taken seriously by someone she considered the most important person in the world. But what impressed her even more was that the princess seemed genuinely interested in hearing what she thought, not just politely listening while waiting for the conversation to end. As they continued their garden tour, other neighbors began to gather at respectful distances. Mrs. Patterson had positioned herself at her front gate with Mr. Biscuit, who seemed to sense the importance of the occasion and was sitting with unusual dignity. Dave the postman had completely abandoned his route and was chatting quietly with other neighbors who had emerged to witness the unprecedented scene. But the growing audience didn't seem to affect Emma or Catherine, who had fallen into an easy rhythm of conversation. The princess asked about Emma's school, her favorite subjects, and her interests outside of royal watching. Emma, emboldened by Catherine's genuine attention, began to share more about herself. "I want to work with children when I grow up," Emma confided as they examined her mother's herb garden. "Maybe be a teacher like Mom, or maybe work for a charity that helps children who don't have nice homes like mine. I think everyone deserves to feel important and cared for." Catherine stopped walking and looked directly at Emma, recognizing something special in this child's instinctive understanding of service and compassion. Here was an 8-year-old who had already grasped concepts that some adults never fully understood. That privilege came with responsibility, that everyone deserved dignity and care, that small acts of kindness could make enormous differences. "That's a wonderful aspiration, Emma," Catherine said, and her voice carried a weight that made it clear she wasn't offering empty praise. "The world needs more people who think the way you do. Tell me, what made you interested in that kind of work?" Emma considered the question seriously, the way children do when they're asked something important by someone they respect. "I suppose I just think that feeling sad or scared or alone is the worst thing that could happen to someone, especially children. And I think that most of the time, people feel sad because they think nobody cares about them. So if you could show them that someone does care, maybe they wouldn't feel sad anymore." The simplicity and clarity of Emma's reasoning was breathtaking. Catherine had heard similar sentiments expressed by professional child psychologists, experienced social workers, and veteran charitable organization leaders, but never with quite this pure understanding of human nature. This little girl had somehow intuited the fundamental truth that lay at the heart of all meaningful charitable work. "You know," Catherine said thoughtfully, "I do quite a bit of work with children's charities, and I think you've just explained the most important part of that work better than anyone ever has before." Emma's eyes went wide with amazement. The idea that she might have said something useful to someone who knew about charitable work professionally was almost too wonderful to believe. She felt as though she was floating several inches off the ground, carried by a combination of pride and disbelief. Sarah, who had been watching this exchange from the doorway, felt tears prick her eyes. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing Emma's natural wisdom recognized and valued by someone of Catherine's experience and position was profoundly moving. More than that, she was struck by the princess's ability to engage with Emma as an equal, to take her ideas seriously and respond with genuine thoughtfulness rather than patronizing praise. As they completed their circuit of the garden and returned to the front door, Catherine seemed reluctant to end the conversation. She had arrived expecting to make a brief courtesy stop, but Emma's enthusiasm and insight had transformed the encounter into something much more meaningful. Here was a child who restored her faith in the next generation, who reminded her why the work she did mattered. "Emma," Catherine said as they reached the front step, "I wonder if you might be interested in visiting one of the children's centers I work with sometime. I think the children there would very much like to meet someone who understands so well what it means to care about others." Emma's jaw dropped. The invitation was so far beyond anything she could have imagined that she temporarily lost the ability to speak. Sarah stepped in, her voice slightly shaky with emotion. "That would be absolutely wonderful, Your Royal Highness. Emma would be thrilled, and I think it would be an incredible learning experience for her." But Catherine wasn't finished. "Actually, I have an even better idea. We're having a special event next month for young people who are interested in charitable work. It's usually for older children, but I think Emma would fit right in. Would you both like to come?" The invitation hung in the air like a gift too precious to touch, too wonderful to believe. Emma looked at her mother, then back at Catherine, then at her mother again, as if checking to make sure this was really happening and not some elaborate dream her 8-year-old imagination had constructed. As Catherine prepared to leave, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small card. "This is my private secretary's contact information," she said, handing it to Sarah. "Someone will call you this week with the details about the event. And, Emma," she turned to address the little girl directly, "I want you to keep watching from your window. You never know what wonderful things might happen when you pay attention to the world around you." Emma clutched the card as though it were made of gold, her hands trembling slightly with the magnitude of what had just occurred. The physical evidence that this extraordinary encounter had really happened was almost as important as the invitation itself. She would treasure this simple white card for the rest of her life, not because of what it represented in terms of social status, but because it symbolized the moment when her dreams had intersected with reality. The princess turned to Sarah with expression that was both grateful and slightly conspiratorial. "Thank you for raising such a thoughtful daughter, Mrs. Richardson. Emma has reminded me today why I love the work I do. Sometimes we need children to help us see the world clearly again." As Catherine walked back toward her waiting car, followed by the discreet attention of her security team, she paused halfway down the garden path and turned back. Emma was still standing in the doorway, watching her with the same intense focus that had characterized her royal vigil, but now with the added glow of someone whose faith in magic had been completely vindicated. "Oh, and Emma," Catherine called back, "I absolutely love your sign. Would it be terribly presumptuous of me to ask if I might have it? I'd like to keep it in my office as a reminder of today." Emma's response was immediate and enthusiastic. She raced upstairs, retrieved the carefully crafted poster from her window, and returned breathless to hand it over. The princess accepted it with the same care she might have shown a state document, examining the colorful decorations and heartfelt message with genuine appreciation. "This is beautiful work," Catherine said sincerely. "I can see you put a lot of thought into every detail. Thank you for sharing it with me." As the royal motorcade prepared to depart, neighbors who had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene began to approach the Richardson house. Mrs. Patterson was the first, moving with more speed than she had shown in years, Mr. Biscuit trotting importantly beside her. "Emma dear," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice filled with excitement. "That was absolutely extraordinary. How did you know to watch for her today?" Emma, still glowing with the aftereffects of her royal encounter, tried to explain the inexplicable certainty that had driven her morning vigil. "I just knew something special was going to happen today, Mrs. Patterson. It felt different when I woke up, like the air was full of electricity or something." Dave the postman, whose route had been completely derailed by the morning's events, approached with his characteristic grin. "Well, Emma, I've been delivering post to this street for 15 years, and I can honestly say that's the first time I've ever seen a princess stop to chat about gardening. You must have quite a bit of magic in you." But it was 7-year-old Lucy Morrison from 2 houses down who asked a question that would follow Emma for weeks afterward. "Emma, what was it like talking to a real princess? Was she like the ones in stories?" Emma considered this carefully, wanting to give an answer that captured the truth of her experience. "She was better than the ones in stories," she said finally. "She was real, and she listened to what I said like it actually mattered. She made me feel important, not because she's famous, but because she's kind." The wisdom of this observation wasn't lost on the adults who heard it. Sarah felt a surge of pride at her daughter's ability to distinguish between celebrity and character, between the superficial excitement of meeting someone famous and the deeper significance of encountering genuine goodness. Over the following days, word of Emma's royal encounter spread through their community with the efficiency of a small-town telephone network. The story grew slightly with each telling, but the essential elements remained constant. A little girl's patient faith had been rewarded with an unexpected magical encounter, and a busy princess had taken time to connect with a child who believed in the importance of kindness. Emma returned to school the next day to find herself something of a celebrity among her classmates. Mrs. Williams, her teacher, had heard about the encounter from Sarah and had prepared the class for Emma's return with appropriate balance between excitement and normalcy. "Class, Mrs. Williams announced, Emma has had quite an adventure that I think she'd like to share with us. But remember, she's still our Emma, and this wonderful experience doesn't change who she is. It just shows us that special things can happen to people who pay attention to the world around them." Emma's account of her royal meeting became the most popular story in year 3, but what impressed her classmates most wasn't the celebrity aspect of the encounter. It was Emma's description of feeling truly heard and valued by someone important, and the invitation to participate in charitable work that excited their imaginations about what they might accomplish themselves. 2 weeks later, true to Catherine's promise, Sarah received a phone call from Kensington Palace. The conversation was surreal in its normalcy, discussing schedules and logistics as though royal events were part of their regular routine. The caller, a pleasant woman named Jennifer, explained that the princess had specifically mentioned Emma and requested that she be included in the upcoming Young Philanthropist gathering. Her Royal Highness was quite taken with Emma's insights about charitable work, Jennifer explained. She felt that Emma would bring a valuable perspective to the event, and she's looking forward to seeing her again. The Young Philanthropist gathering turned out to be exactly what Emma had dreamed charitable work might be like. Held in a beautiful room at Kensington Palace, it brought together 30 young people aged 8 to 16 who had shown exceptional commitment to helping others in their communities. Emma was the youngest participant, but her ideas about turning toward the light and making people feel important resonated with teenagers who had organized food drives, started anti-bullying campaigns, and created support groups for their peers. Catherine moved through the gathering like a skilled conductor, ensuring that every young person felt included and valued. But she made sure to spend extra time with Emma, asking about her sunflower project and whether she had continued her royal watching activities. Actually, Emma confided, "I've been so busy thinking about the charitable work we discussed that I've forgotten to watch from my window. But that's okay because now I know that the most important things happen when you're actively looking for ways to help people, not just watching and waiting for things to happen to you." The insight impressed Catherine as much as everything else Emma had shared. Here was a child who had naturally progressed from passive hope to active engagement, who had understood intuitively that real magic happened when you created it yourself rather than waited for it to find you. During the event, Emma met teenagers who had started their own charities, organized community gardens, and created programs to help elderly people feel less lonely. She listened to their stories with the same intense focus she had once reserved for royal watching, and began to understand that there were as many ways to help others as there were people willing to try. When Catherine asked the group to share their future plans, Emma stood up with the confidence of someone whose ideas had been taken seriously by people she respected. "I want to start a program where children visit other children who are in hospitals or care homes, not to feel sorry for them, but to be friends with them and show them that someone thinks they're important. Because I think being lonely is worse than being sick or scared, and friendship is the best medicine for loneliness." The applause that followed Emma's statement wasn't polite adult encouragement. It was genuine appreciation from her fellow young philanthropists who recognized a kindred spirit. Several older participants immediately approached her afterward to discuss how such a program might work and offer their assistance in developing the idea. As the gathering concluded, Catherine pulled Emma aside for a private conversation. "You know, Emma, when I stopped to talk with you that morning, I thought I was doing something nice for a little girl who had been watching for me. But it turns out you were the one who gave me a gift. You reminded me why I love this work, and you've inspired me to think differently about how we can help children feel valued and important." Emma, who had grown significantly more confident over the course of the afternoon, looked directly at the princess and said, "I think that's what happens when people really listen to each other. Everyone has something important to say, but sometimes we need someone to care enough to hear it." The observation was so profound and delivered with such natural wisdom that Catherine felt a moment of genuine awe at this extraordinary child's understanding of human nature. Emma had articulated something that veteran diplomats and experienced charitable workers sometimes struggled to express: the fundamental importance of truly listening to others, especially those whose voices weren't always heard. As Emma and Sarah prepared to leave Kensington Palace, Catherine made one final request. "Emma, would you mind if I stayed in touch with you? I'd love to hear how your friendship program develops, and I suspect you'll have more insights that could help with the work we do here." For Emma, this offer of ongoing connection with someone she admired was the perfect conclusion to an experience that had exceeded every dream she had dared to have. But more than that, it represented validation that her ideas had value, that her young voice could contribute to important conversations about making the world better. The car ride home was filled with excited chatter about everything Emma had seen and learned, but as they pulled on a Clarence road, she became thoughtful. Looking up at her bedroom window, she realized that her life had been fundamentally changed by this experience. She was no longer just a little girl watching, hopefully, for magic to appear. She was someone with the power to create positive change in the world around her. 6 months after that extraordinary Tuesday morning, Emma Richardson sat in the head teacher's office at St. Margaret's Primary School. But this time she wasn't in trouble. Across from her sat Mrs. Henderson, the head teacher, Catherine's private secretary Jennifer, and, most remarkably, Catherine herself. They were discussing the implementation of Emma's Sunshine Friends program, which had grown from a child's simple idea into a structured initiative that was about to be piloted in 3 local hospitals and 2 children's care facilities. The transformation in Emma over those 6 months had been remarkable to witness. The shy 8-year-old who had once watched hopefully from her bedroom window had evolved into a confident young advocate who spoke at community meetings, corresponded regularly with the princess about charitable initiatives, and had somehow managed to maintain her childlike wonder while developing an impressive understanding of how to turn compassion into action. Emma, Catherine was saying, your proposal for training sessions is exactly what we needed to ensure the program's success. How did you think of including art therapy as part of the friendship visits? Emma's response demonstrated how much she had learned about presenting ideas to adults while retaining her natural enthusiasm. Well, Your Royal Highness, when I visited the children's ward at Windsor Hospital, I noticed that lots of the children were too tired or uncomfortable to talk very much. But while I brought some drawing supplies and we made pictures together, they seemed much happier and more relaxed. I thought maybe if all the Sunshine Friends knew some simple art activities, they could connect with children even when talking was difficult. The insight was profound in its simplicity. Emma had identified a crucial element that professional child life specialists spend years learning, that nonverbal activities often provided better therapeutic value than conversation for young patients dealing with illness or trauma. Her instinctive understanding of children's needs had led her to develop programming elements that were both innovative and evidence-based. Mrs. Henderson, who had watched Emma's development with growing amazement, leaned forward with interest. Emma, how do you plan to train other children to be Sunshine Friends? That seems like quite a responsibility for someone your age. Emma's face lit up with the enthusiasm that had characterized her involvement in the project from the beginning. Oh, I won't be training them by myself, Mrs. Henderson. Catherine has arranged for child psychologists and play therapists to help with the official training. But I'll be there to explain what it feels like to be a Sunshine Friend and to help other children understand that it's not about being perfect or knowing all the right things to say. It's about showing up and caring. The phrase showing up and caring had become Emma's unofficial motto for the program, and it had resonated far beyond her original conception. Catherine had used it in several speeches about youth engagement and charitable work, and it had been adopted by other children's organizations as a guiding principle for volunteer programs. Jennifer, who had become Emma's primary contact for coordinating between her ideas and the practical implementation of programs, smiled as she reviewed her notes. Emma, I have some exciting news. The Children's Hospital in London has requested that we expand the pilot program to include their facility. They were particularly impressed by your emphasis on friendship rather than pity, and they think their young patients would benefit enormously from this approach. Emma's response revealed the depth of thought she had put into her program's underlying philosophy. That's wonderful, but we'll need to make sure the London Sunshine Friends understand that they're not there to make the sick children feel better about being sick. They're there to help them remember that they're still children first, and that they deserve to have fun and feel important just like any other children. The sophistication of Emma's reasoning continued to amaze the adults who worked with her. She had somehow grasped the crucial distinction between pity-based charity and dignity-preserving friendship, a concept that many adult volunteers struggled to understand. Her approach emphasized the humanity and agency of the children being visited rather than focusing on their conditions or circumstances. Over the following months, as the Sunshine Friends program expanded beyond its pilot phase, Emma found herself traveling to schools and community centers throughout the region, helping to recruit and inspire other young volunteers. Her presentations were unlike anything the adults had ever witnessed. A 9-year-old speaking with passion and authority about the importance of treating every child as valuable and worthy of friendship. At one particularly memorable school assembly, Emma was asked by a skeptical 10-year-old whether visiting sick children wasn't just depressing and sad. Emma's response became legendary among those who worked in children's charitable organizations. "Sometimes it is sad," Emma acknowledged honestly. "Some of the children I visit are dealing with really hard things, and that's not fun to see. But you know what I've learned? Every single child I've met, no matter how sick or scared they are, has something amazing about them. They're funny, or creative, or brave, or kind, or really good at video games, or they know interesting facts about dinosaurs. When you focus on who they are instead of what's wrong with them, you remember that friendship is supposed to be about enjoying each other's company." She paused, looking directly at the boy who had asked the question. "And here's the really important part. They help me too. I've learned more about being brave and staying positive for my sunshine friends than I've ever taught them. So it's not sad at all. It's like having a whole collection of the most interesting friends you could ever want to meet." The response was so genuine and thoughtful that it reduced several teachers in the audience to tears. Emma had articulated something that professional charitable workers often struggled to explain, that meaningful charitable work was ultimately about mutual enrichment rather than one-way assistance. Catherine, who attended several of Emma's presentations, watched with growing respect as the young girl developed into a natural leader and advocate. But what impressed her most was Emma's continued humility and focus on service rather than recognition. Despite the attention her program had generated, Emma remained fundamentally unchanged in her essential character: kind, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in making others feel valued. The impact of Emma's work extended far beyond the children directly served by the Sunshine Friends program. Her story had spread throughout the charitable community, inspiring other young people to develop their own service initiatives. More importantly, her emphasis on dignity and friendship rather than pity and assistance had influenced how several established organizations approach their work with vulnerable populations. On the first anniversary of their initial meeting, Catherine arranged to visit Emma's school to officially launch the expanded Sunshine Friends program. As she stood in the school's assembly hall, looking out at hundreds of excited children, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple hello on a quiet residential street. 1 year ago, Catherine told the assembled students, "I met a young girl who taught me something very important about how we should treat each other. Emma Richardson showed me that the most powerful thing we can do for another person is to see them as worthy of our friendship, regardless of their circumstances." Today, because of Emma's vision and hard work, children throughout our region are experiencing the kind of dignified friendship. She paused, looking directly at Emma, who was sitting in the front row, trying to look modest despite her obvious pride. But the most remarkable thing about Emma isn't that she had a good idea. It's that she had the courage to turn that idea into action and the wisdom to remember that true service is about lifting others up rather than feeling good about ourselves. Emma's response to the recognition was characteristically thoughtful. When invited to speak to the assembly, she stood up with the confidence that had developed over months of public presentations. But her message remained focused on others rather than herself. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," Emma began formally, then shifted to her more natural speaking style. "But I want everyone to know that the Sunshine Friends program isn't really about me. It's about all the amazing children we get to be friends with and all the wonderful volunteers who care enough to show up and share their time. I just had the idea. Everybody else makes it work." She looked out at her fellow students with the earnestness that had characterized all her charitable work. "And I want to tell all of you that you don't have to wait until you're older to make a difference. Every single one of you has something special to offer, and there are people in our community who would feel happier and less lonely if they could be your friend. You just have to look around and see where you're needed." The assembly concluded with the announcement that Emma's school would serve as the headquarters for training young Sunshine Friend volunteers, and that Emma herself would continue to work with the program while pursuing her regular education. But for Emma, the most meaningful moment came afterward, when a shy 7-year-old approached her in the corridor. "Emma," the little girl said quietly, "I want to be a sunshine friend too. My gran is in a care home, and she gets really lonely. Do you think I could visit other grans who don't have family nearby?" Emma's face lit up with the same enthusiasm that had characterized her very first royal encounter. "That's a brilliant idea. We absolutely need sunshine friends for elderly people too. Would you like to help me figure out how to make that work?" As Emma walked home that afternoon, past the now famous spot where Catherine's car had stopped a year earlier, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The little girl who had once spent her mornings hoping for magic to appear had discovered that the real magic lay in her ability to create positive change in the world around her. Her bedroom window, which had once served as a royal watching post, now displayed a different kind of sign. Hand-lettered in her careful script, it read, "Sunshine friends welcome here. Everyone deserves a friend." Below, it hung dozens of drawings and thank you notes from the children she had visited, a colorful testament to the connections she had helped facilitate. Mrs. Patterson, walking Mr. Biscuit passed the Richardson house as she did every evening, noticed Emma in her garden tending to the sunflowers that had grown tall and strong throughout the summer. The old woman smiled, remembering the intense little girl who had once watched so hopefully from her window, and marveling at the confident young advocate she had become. "Still growing sunflowers, dear?" Mrs. Patterson called over the garden fence. Emma looked up from her gardening with a smile that seemed to light up the entire street. "Always, Mrs. Patterson. Dad says I've become quite good at it. But you know what I've learned? The best thing about sunflowers isn't that they turn toward the sun. It's that they're so bright and cheerful that they help other people turn toward the light too." It was a perfect metaphor for what Emma herself had become, a source of light that helped others find their own capacity for kindness and service. The little girl who had believed in the magic of royal encounters had discovered something far more valuable: the transformative power of human connection and her own ability to create the kind of world she wanted to live in. As the sun set over Clarence Road, Emma continued working in her garden, surrounded by the tall sunflowers that had become her symbol for always turning toward the light. In the distance, a small convoy of cars drove past, but Emma was too absorbed in her work to notice. She had found something better than waiting for magic. She had learned to create it herself, one friendship at a time.